Ferro, commercial realtor, awesome guy. He and I have had some great conversations. I remember one time he brought me out to lunch, and then the next day he scolded me, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. So he will tell you how it is. Not he'll tell you what you have to hear, not what you want to hear. So Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ryan. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm a lot of that. I have also been teaching and training, and there are things I feel very strongly about because there isn't a company that's more vested in your success as ours. Okay, but we provide the training, the guidance, the counseling, but the one thing we cannot provide is your attitude, your motivation. Wanting to say earlier is one of the best things about this business is you can decide how much money you want to make. And we can tell you how many people you're going to have to talk to on a daily basis in order to earn that amount of money. And what I have told my people in commercial, and I was managing commercial for 22 years, I told them, if you do exactly what's on this work plan and you don't achieve the income that's on the top line, I will pay you the difference out of my 401k. Because I know that it cannot not work. It's a business of numbers. We know how many contacts it's going to take to get an appointment. We know how many appointments you're going to have to go on average when you first start in order to get a listing. We know what percentage of the listings are going to sell, and then we know what the average commission check is. So going through all those numbers, I can tell you, like in commercial, if somebody wants to make $75,000 in a year, they're going to have to talk to 15 to 17 people a day about commercial real estate. Now, these are all different kinds of conversations. They're not phone calls. They're not cold calls. They're talking to somebody at a networking event, at a chamber function, at church, at PTA meetings. The idea is to get as many people as possible to remember you and what you do. It's over and above calling FSBOs and expireds, right? There are only three sources of business in real estate. Always have been, always will be. FSBOs, expired, and your center of influence. That's it. There's no other place to get a piece of business. And that's true for whether you've been in the business for 1 year or 100 years. Now, what happens when you've been in the business for a while is you'll be getting repeat and referral business. But that's an extension of your center of influence, your COI, okay? All right, so we're gonna do two things in our time together. We're gonna talk about, the first thing we're gonna talk about are the similarities and differences between residential real estate and commercial real estate. And then we're going to talk about how you value income property the correct way. Because once you get above a 4-unit, the properties, even at 4-unit, the property's not going to sell on the basis of how pretty the molding is there on the fireplace. Okay, it's going to sell on the basis of the income that it generates and whether it's a positive or negative cash flow. Once somebody buys it, gets a mortgage, and is now paying debt. All right. So similarities. Well, first of all, let's say that in our company, we ask people to specialize between residential and commercial. It has nothing to do with some people aren't smart enough to do commercial. What it has to do with is there's so much going on in either segment that there's no way you everything going on and be a real value to your clients. Because that's what we're getting paid for. There's nobody out there that charges a higher commission than we do. So we have to constantly prove value. And one of the ways you prove value is to know what's going on. My two kids have now bought and sold 2 houses each. I had nothing to do with those 4 transactions, other than recommending a residential broker for them to work with. I'm a member of the residential MLS. I can look up and see what's available for sale and what comps are. But I'm not going to know everything about residential real estate, and my kids are going to suffer for my lack of knowledge. So I referred it out. Okay. In commercial, it's even worse, because in commercial, we have different types of property, and there are different things going on with each type. And if you spent most of your time dealing with warehouses and land for development, and suddenly somebody gives you a chance to list a restaurant, you're not going to be of great value to that person. You don't know what's going on in the restaurant world. But we fall into traps, especially when we're new, because we're desperate to take any listing we can. I did it when I first started. I had the chance to list a restaurant in Copake Falls, which is about an hour's drive south of Albany. And unfortunately, I got the listing. Every time I had to do a showing, it was 3 to 4 hours. Driving down, driving back, spending time there. I think part of the reason I took that listing all the time I was working on that restaurant. And by the way, I knew nothing about Copake Falls, and I knew nothing about restaurants at the time. Was time I didn't have to feel guilty about prospecting. Prospecting is tough. That is the hardest part of our job. Real estate is not brain surgery, but it takes efforts that most people can't or don't want to do. And that's the looking for business, the searching for business. Okay. We'll get to that more. All right. So when we talk about commercial property, we're talking about offices, whether they're for lease or an office building for sale, industrial, whether it's a manufacturing plant or most typically a warehouse for warehouse distribution, retail, hotels and motels, large investment properties, restaurants. The sale of a business falls under commercial, although I can tell you that 98% of the commercial brokers out there, whether in our company or outside, really aren't capable of selling a business. Selling a business is a totally different animal than selling a real estate. Because of my background, I've been able to sell businesses and understand the P&L of a business and how you value a business based on the income that it generates. It's a little different than valuing a piece of property on the basis of the income the property generates. But we do businesses as well. Now, there are some properties that cross over, that are done by commercial agents, are done by residential agents. And those are multifamily properties. That's why it's important to know how to price a multifamily and understand what a pro forma income statement is and how a bank looks at the income statement and includes things that most brokers don't include, like a reserve for replacements and a management fee, that kind of thing. A mixed-use building. Mixed-use building is where you have a commercial component, say on the first floor, and you have apartments upstairs, whether it's 1, 2, whatever. That's a mixed-use building, commercial, residential. Land. Land is sold by residential people as well as by commercial people, but I hardly recommend, if it's a large piece of land that's being offered for development, to not bother with it. Refer it out. Before a large piece of land can be sold, there's going to be probably 1 to 5 years delay in order for the buyer to get all the approvals that he or she needs in order to build what they want to build. All right. So you got a piece of land that's big enough for 150 houses. Before the buyer will close on that, he needs the approvals from the municipalities to do those 150 houses, because that's what he's basing what he's willing to pay for the land. But before he can get those approvals, the project has to be all designed out in order to present it to the town board or the city planning department. And after that, there's likely going to be changes that are necessary. So they have to change the design and come back again. They may have to come back 2 or 3 times. And just designing it out from the beginning can take 6 to 9 months. So it's a very long process. So you can work on something for 2 years and find out that your transaction just collapsed because the approvals weren't granted and you get nothing for it. If it's a lot that's already been approved to build a house on, yeah, those are great. Sell those all day long. Okay, much easier. The last category of product that residential people can sell, even though it's a commercial property, would be a standalone building, like an old bond fair store or a Stewart's that isn't being used by Stewart's anymore. But I have to tell you, residential people, because they've been spending 99.5% of their time on selling residential properties, aren't going to have the information available at their fingertips to value the property or to sell it. We use resources that are very expensive, websites that are only for commercial properties that we have to subscribe to. Each commercial agent spends about $450 a month, every month, just to use those resources. But I can tell you what happened to one of our commercial agents when she went up on a listing appointment for a building up in Saratoga on Geyser Road that had been an old bond fair. That's a convenience store in the old days. Homework and had all the comparables available to tell the seller what his property was worth. And he said, oh, no, that's got to be wrong. I went on Zillow and Zillow said my property is worth $750,000. Okay. Where the commercial broker's opinion was half of that. Well, when he went on Zillow, Zillow assumed that he had a 5,000 square foot house in the city of Saratoga. And they priced it that way. And he was convinced that's what his property was worth. So it gets a little complicated. All right, now, some of the rural and residential. Leasing is a big part. You all have this, right? You all have the handout? Okay. Leasing is a big part of commercial real estate, where it's not very important at all in terms of generating income in the residential world. I mean, if you rent out an apartment, I mean, what's your commission? 1 month's rent? Same on a house. If you rent a whole house on a 1-year lease, you're not going to make that much money. But in commercial, we get much larger spaces. And if we rent 10,000 square feet of brand new office space to a medical practice, our commission can be $35,000. So leasing is a very big part of commercial. The 2 largest deals ever done by our company were both leases representing the tenant. They were looking for a new location, and in both cases, a new building was built for them. of the requests for proposals, reviewing all the proposals, the fine point negotiations with the developer who was going to build the building. In both cases, the total commission was over $1 million. I mean, I used to dream about doing a deal where the sale price was $1 million. And in these two cases, the commission was 1.1 million and 1.3 million. But those deals took about 3 years each. They both fell apart at least twice before they came back together again. And they both involved 3 agents working on it, okay? So that's one of the things about commercial. Our transactions take longer, a lot of times because you're waiting for the approvals, other times because you could run into environmental problems or that kind of thing, okay? But leasing is a big part of commercial. We don't do open houses in commercial. That's another difference. Most of our business is conducted during normal business hours, as opposed to Saturdays and Sundays that you'll be getting a lot into. We have a greater number of transaction types. All right, you're used to or will be used to pretty much a purchase and a sale contract. You might come across a lease, but for the most part, you're going to be dealing with a purchase contract. We have probably, what do we got? 5 different types. In addition to the lease, well, purchase and sale first, and then the lease I just talked about. We have lease with an option to buy, where the tenant has the right to buy the property during the time period of his or her lease. Okay. They don't have to buy the property, but they have the option to. Now, the downside for the owner of the property is they can't sell the property to anybody else because the tenant has first dibs on buying it. But that's a lease with an option to purchase. There's also something called a lease purchase, where the tenant does contract at the outset to buy the property, lease it for a certain amount of time, and then buy it at a certain price at a certain point in the future. That's a lease purchase, okay? A sale leaseback is usually done with a company who's trying to raise cash, but doesn't really want to move from their location. So what they do is they sell their property to an investor and then turn around and lease it from that investor. So that's where you get the sale leaseback. Now, the sale price and what the tenant's willing to pay for a lease has to coincide. You can't want $1 billion for your property, but only want to pay peanuts for a lease rate. It's got to make sense for the investor. These do happen from time to time, not very often, but they usually, as I said, they usually involve companies who are trying to raise cash, maybe for to add on a new production line, maybe to expand into Florida, that kind of thing. Most people don't know it, but there are a lot of companies out there that don't own the real estate they operate in. Drugstores, for instance, are never owned by the Walgreens, the CVS, or the Rite Aid. They're owned by either the developer that built them or the investor who brought the property, okay? Those companies do not want to have money tied up in bricks and mortar. They want to use the cash that they have to expand, right? Build another store. They'd rather just pay rent. Okay. Now, let's see. A tax deferred exchange. You can sell commercial property and delay paying the capital gains tax that you would have to pay on the increase in value of that property by buying another property under very, very strict rules, IRS rules. That's it's called a 1031 exchange, because 1031 is the section of the tax code that allows this. Very complicated, but this is done fairly often. Now, the last thing we have is what's called a straight option. If a developer is looking for sites for a new Walgreens drugstore, say Walgreens calls their preferred developer and says, hey, we want to put a store in this place you call Delmar. The developer has to go out and not only search for the sites, but he has to have them under control so that if Walgreens says, yes, we love this site, Walgreens knows that the developer can buy it, okay? They're not going to waste time evaluating a site and then find out that, oops, somebody just bought it. It's not available anymore. So the developer has to tie up this property. And the way they tie it up, they don't buy it, go there. And they may be doing this on different sites, Delmar. What they do is they offer, or what they do with the owner is get an option to buy. So they negotiate an option wherein they are the only ones that can buy their property for a certain amount of time. And then there's a negotiation about how much the owner is going to receive in order to take his or her property off the market for that time period. It could be the developer says, I'll give you $1,000 a month while we're going through the analysis process. Or they may say, we want the first 6 months for free, then we'll give you a lump sum $5,000. That's all things that can be negotiated. But that's an option on a property the developer will take. They have the option to buy it, but they don't have to, okay? And the owner has to agree to take it off the market. It's much more difficult to get comparable sales in commercial than it is in residential. I mean, if you've got to go on a listing appointment for a 4-bedroom home with 3.5 baths in Clifton Park, could be 7 of them sold last week. That's not usually the case in commercial. If someone is buying an office building, yes, there are other office buildings that you can equate it to. But a lot of commercial properties are very different. We had one that had a chemical laboratory in it. It had office space, it had a warehouse, and it had a machine shop. But there's no way you're going to find another property. Okay, so it's a lot harder to put together the price. That's why you'll see a lot of commercial properties will sell for half of what the original listing price was. Okay. The property I just described, we actually had listed for 7 years before somebody finally bought it. And the way we had valued it at the outset is laboratory space is worth so much, office space is worth so much, warehouse space, et cetera, and we added them all up. And I told the owner, if someone comes along and wants this building for exactly the way you're using it, it's worth $1.1 million. But you know, in 7 years, no one came by who wanted that building for exactly the way it was set up. It ended up selling for $475,000 to somebody who just redeveloped it. The first 2 offers we got were actually from churches that were even lower than that. But so it's a little bit tougher to get comparable sales data in commercial. I've already spoken about commercial transactions take longer to generate, and they take longer to close just because of the nature of the beast. I talked about the fact that some of them will require municipal approvals, which is a whole different process. I've got one going on right now where the developer has offered $2.5 million for a piece of property to build apartments on. But the property is zoned R1, which is for residential single-family homes. So in order for this to work, in order for it to close and the developer get his approvals, we have to get a zoning change. And to get a zoning change in most towns, you go to the town board first and tell them what you want to do. And they refer you to the planning board. Then you have to make your presentation to the planning board, and the planning board recommends back to the town board, yes or no on this project. Now, our project got a no from the planning board, got sent back to the town board, and the town board doesn't necessarily have to vote no on this project. They could still do yes, because what they got from the planning board was a recommendation. But it's a tough process when you got to do a zoning change. So that's taking forever. I mean, we've been working on this, getting the offer and doing the approvals for 8 months now already. So even if the approvals are granted, it's probably going to be another 6 to 7 months before the developer is ready to close. Okay. Long process. Knowing that I talked about the zoning, knowing the correct zoning on a property in commercial is very, very important. I mean, we knew what the zoning was. That's why we knew we had to go for a zoning change. But sometimes people will offer a property out there and not have the proper zoning. Someone will buy it and then find out after they bought it that they can't do what they thought they could do at that site. Okay. For instance, Freeman's Bridge Road in Scotia changed their zoning. The town of Glenville changed the zoning on Freeman's Bridge Road not to allow any automotive uses. Now that's a recent change. If I sold the listing that I have on Freeman's Bridge Road right now under the old zoning laws, and someone believed me and bought it and had planned to put a car dealership there or a car repair place, our company would be in very hot water for misrepresenting that property. Okay. Knowing the right zoning also helps you market the property. If you know what it's approved for, those are the categories of buyers you go after when you're making calls to sell your listing. Commercial deals are going to involve more economic analysis than a residential deal ever would. Not every one of our deals requires economic analysis, but you really do have to know your way around a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, to do the stuff that we do. Environmental issues are much more likely to cause a problem in commercial than they are in residential. I personally have had, well, we were selling a property in Schenectady that was on a corner, didn't know what the property had been used for in the past. Then found out that it had been a gas station during the 50s and 60s. So they had to do an environmental test where they did a boring, probably about 6 or 8 feet down into the ground to check the groundwater and to check the soil for some gasoline that may have leaked out of the gas tanks. And sure enough, the gas tanks had leaked. And back in the old days, it didn't matter. You could pull out the tanks and just fill in the hole, but not anymore. Once it's known that there's contamination in the ground, all of that dirt has got to be dug out and replaced with clean soil. And the dirt actually has to go in 55-gallon drums to a place where it's incinerated. Very costly, very costly. So we not only had a delay in the getting this property closed when we found out about the gas, but the owners had a $115,000 bill for the cleanup. Now, luckily in this case, because there are ways to prove by chemical analysis when gasoline was sold. We could trace it back to an Esso station back in the 60s, which is now Exxon. So the owners were able to sue Exxon and get their $115,000 back because it was Exxon or Esso before them that had caused the contamination. Okay, environmental problems. Now, similarities between residential and commercial. Your income goal can be exactly the same. People have told me they want to work in commercial so they can make a lot of money. While we do have those situations with the $1 million commissions, A, they don't come along very often. B, they take a long time, and they're going to require more than one agent working on them. We have residential brokers, agents in our company that earn way more money than people. Okay. So your income goal has nothing to do with whether or not you want to work in residential or commercial. The sources of business are exactly the same. As I had said before, FSBOs, expireds, center of influence. That's the deal in residential. That's the deal in commercial. Exactly the same. What you have to do on a daily basis to be successful is exactly the same. It's contacts. And when I say contact, I mean a conversation with somebody about real estate. The average commission check in commercial is virtually the same as the average commission check in residential, because we do have small transactions. Not all of our transactions are multi-million dollars. If a building sells for $275,000, the commission check is going to be the same as if you sold a $275,000 house. Okay. Emotion. When I first got into the business, Jeff Christiana, the president, asked me if I wanted to work in residential or commercial. And I said, oh my God, there's no way I could put up with the emotion in residential. I want to work in commercial. He just smiled, and I found out, he let me find out on my own that there's a lot of emotion in commercial too. It turns out if there are human beings involved, there's going to be emotion. I've had a president of a company call me and say he was looking for a new location for his business. My first question is, okay, where do you live? And he says, what does that got to do with it? I said, I'm just curious. I'm curious because no matter what numbers say, he's not going to drive an extra 45 minutes to get to the office if he doesn't have to. Okay. There's emotion in every decision made. A lot of times you can show them the numbers till you're blue in the face, and they'll come up with an emotional reason why they're going to get around the numbers and do this instead. So emotion does play a part. The objections we get when we're making a presentation, going after a listing, I love you, but your commission is too high. I don't give any agent an exclusive listing because I know too many, they'll get mad at me. All those objections that you get or you're going to get are the same ones we get, and they're handled exactly the same way. Okay. So that's another similarity. Any questions about that? No?
Hey, Richard.
Yes.
Now, obviously, as we're going through, you brought up some of the objections. Is that part of your class where you kind of go over some rebuttals and how to overcome those?
No.
Would you mind a quick role play if we did that for a few minutes, just to put you on the spot?
Not at all. You want to be the pain in the ass client?
You had me pegged from day one, my friend.
All right, go for it.
All right, so we're sitting down. Hey, Richard, it's all looks good, but your commission rate is too high.
I can understand you saying that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, Johnny Smith from down the road is going to charge me a lot less to do the same job that you're going to do.
Okay, Ryan. I've got to believe though that you care more about what you're going to net in this transaction than what you're going to pay for a commission. Isn't that true?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to make as much money as possible.
Okay. Let me tell you how we do business and how we can net you more money.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yes?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Then I would launch into the resources that we have at our disposal, B, the fact that what separates us most from other real estate companies is we don't put up a sign, put it in the MLS, and hope that somebody calls. We do put up a sign, of course, and we do put it in the MLS. But what separates us is we then make phone calls, direct phone calls to the most likely buyers for your property. Our goal the whole time is to generate a multiple offer situation. And you know that in a multiple offer situation, you're much more likely to get more money for your property. Isn't that true?
Yeah, you're right.
So is there any reason you wouldn't want to get started right away on this?
Well, the other thing too is, my best friend's cousin's uncle's sister, she's a real estate agent, and I owe it to, an extended part of the family to use them.
Okay. Ryan, are there any other things that would prevent you from moving forward?
No, just those are the two biggest ones.
Those are the two biggest. Okay. Which of those two is the most important?
I would say, well, the commission, which we already handled, and then, obviously, given my best friend's cousin's uncle's brother the benefit of the doubt, and having them list my $1 million property because they just got the real estate license yesterday, and it sounds like a really smart idea.
Ryan, my concern in that case would be without the tools and the methods to market, put under contract, and close a commercial transaction, you're not going to be in the best position with your uncle's brother, sister's cousin. And let me ask you this. How would you feel at the next Thanksgiving after you've had to fire her?
Yeah, I guess I never thought of that. It would not be good. Be very awkward Thanksgiving.
Yes.
All right, I'll sign.
Okay.
That was
Now, what I should have done when you brought up the commission is say right off the bat, is there anything else preventing you from moving forward? And then when there's multiple things, you want to say, okay, of those, which is the most important? And of course, that's the one you want to really stress. But I'm always asking, is there any reason you wouldn't want to get started on this today? Is that, that answers the question. The thing about handling objections that you have to remember most, it can't be you against them, okay? Because if it's you against them and they have to give in and say, yeah, you're right, it's not going to be a great feeling for them, okay? It can't be a win-lose situation. So what I've told people is, okay, look, somebody brings up an objection and you think of it as you're putting your arm around the person and looking at this ugly mess up on the wall. And you're saying, how are we going to address this? How can we solve this problem? That way, they're part of the solution that you really wanted them to get to anyway. And you're starting off in a much better situation with the client. That make sense?
Absolutely. That was great.
Okay. I do have some rules for negotiation that I get into after the financial analysis as well. But one of the things I wanted to go over is we're very poor. A lot of us are very poor at coming up with a methodical way to build our business. And one of the toughest is the COI. Now, your COI isn't necessarily going to generate a lot of business for you in the short term. I've always told people, okay, the first thing you do when you get in real estate and you get your business cards is you send a letter to everybody you know with a couple of business cards and telling them about how excited you are to now be in real estate. And if they have any questions or any needs to buy or sell property, to please give you a call, okay? So that's kind of like an automatic thing, like putting a sign up on a listing, all right? Your COI. The next thing you have to do is you write down every single person you know. People who are or could be in a position to recommend business to you, if not do business with you directly. Because that's one of the benefits about a COI isn't that specific person. It's everybody that person knows. If they remember who you are and what you do for a living. And I can tell you right now, it won't be long before one of your best friends, if not somebody in your family, buys or sells a house without you. And you're going to be so mad. But I can tell you that it's not their fault, it's your fault. Because you didn't remind them often enough what you do. Now, by reminding them often enough what you do, I do not mean calling them once a week and saying, you're looking to buy or sell a house? Do you know anybody looking to buy or sell a house? And that's it, okay? Those calls are a pain in the ass. And people will hate you for it, okay? But another advantage of what we do for a living is people want to know what we know, okay? You meet somebody at a cocktail party, you tell them you're in residential real estate, the first question they're going to ask you is, how's the market? I wonder what my house is worth. How long is it taking to sell a house these days? They want to know, okay? On the commercial side, they'll see something being built and they'll say, what the heck is going in on the corner of Central Avenue and Fuller Road? Giving people information, even if they don't need it at that point in time, but giving people information is the best for them to remember what you do. Okay? Now, along these lines, once you've got a list of your COI, people that would cross the street to say hi to you, people that would call you in an instant to sell their house or buy a new one, people who would have no problem recommending you, that's your COI list. And if you want to do this right, if you've got 100, let's say you have 50 people in your COI, only 50. Those 50 people should be good for 10 transactions a year. Year after year after year. Maybe not directly with them, but somebody they know. Okay? So if you want an easy system, a very inexpensive system to run a good COI operation, you do this. You take a sheet of paper, you get a binder, 3-ring binder, and you buy numbered tabs that go from 1 to 20. And then you get a sheet of paper, and on each sheet of paper, you write down a name, contact information, and why they're in your COI. Okay? So let's say you've got 50 people in your COI. Well, let's say you got 100. You got 100 people in your COI. You divide that now stack of 100 papers by 20 because you have 20 tabs in your binder. and you put 5 people behind each tab. Now, the number on the tab corresponds to the working day of the month, Monday through Friday. They're usually 20 days, okay? So if this is the 7th working day of the month, you go to tab 7 and you call the 5 people behind tab 7 and have some information ready for them. A property that just listed, a property that just sold, what's going on in the market generally. GCAR just came out with a summary of September's sales, number and average selling price, okay? Have some information to tell them. And after you tell them the information, ask them if it would be okay to call them every so often to let them know what's going on in the market. Hardly anyone is going to say no. Don't call me. I don't want to hear from you anymore. If they do, by the way, you take their sheet of paper out of the binder and you find somebody to replace him or her. Okay. You write down on that piece of paper the date and what you covered in the phone conversation. Maybe they told you that their spouse just went into the hospital for an operation. So the next time you call them, you could say, the last time we talked, blah, 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 I was going into the hospital. How did they make out? Is that a good way to build a bonding relationship? You bet. Now, you're going to be calling these people once a month. You're not going to talk to that person again until the 7th working day of the following month. But you're going to do it every single month. Most people stop this, even if they do start it, because they didn't get any business after the 2nd month. They say, well, this doesn't work. It takes a minimum of 4 good conversations for somebody to remember you and what you do. Okay? It takes that repetitiveness. You've got to be willing to put that effort into your COI. But if you can get 10 transactions out of 50 people, you can get 20 transactions out of 100. 20 transactions. Would that be okay? I mean, will that get you to your income goal? The average commission check is, say, $4,000, and some of them will be doubles. Not bad. Okay. And see, one of the tough things about prospecting is, who do I call? Well, with the COI system, you've got an automatic start to who do I call for today, because you've got the names behind your tab for today. Okay. So you might want to try that. I think it'll benefit you. Any questions about that or anything else? Oh, wait, we had some frequently asked questions. Does one need experience in residential to do commercial? No. There's virtually nothing you can learn in residential that's going to help you in commercial. Knowing the value of that 5th bedroom or whether or not there should be a pool is not going to help you when you do a commercial deal. And sales skills that you have to learn in order to be successful can be learned from scratch by the commercial people too. So there's really nothing that translates over. I have heard real estate say, even if you know at this point that you're going to sell commercial and only commercial, you should still start residential. That's a bald-faced lie. That's a bald-faced lie. Now, I said before that it takes longer to generate a commercial deal and close it. But when somebody starts it in commercial, I would never let them work on land for development because that takes way too long. Okay. I would strongly recommend that they work on multifamily and mixed use building, because those you're going to be able to generate business with a lot faster. Okay. So it does take longer for a lot of the deals we do, but there are some commercial deals that will close on kind of like the same schedule as the residential deal. Should I work in commercial or residential? The answer to this question has more to do with what you have an affinity for. If you identify with the attributes of a home and what those attributes do for the people, for family that own that home, then you should work in residential. If you identify more with the attributes of a retail store or a warehouse and what those do for the user or investor, then you should work in commercial. Okay. You want to work with stuff you like to do, stuff that you identify with. Okay. I could never see myself saying, and look at the view of this beautiful cherry tree out the dining room window. I can't personally paint that kind of picture. Okay. But numbers and understanding the good and bad parts of a warehouse space and the difference in a retail store being in the middle as opposed to being on the end, that I can do. All right. So I work in commercial. Is there special training for commercial agents? Yes. After basic training like you're going through now, a commercial agent would have to learn about all the different transaction types that we talked about. They'd have to learn about all the different property types that we talked about. When I manage commercial, I even recommended to my people that they specialize in 2 at the most kinds of commercial property. For the same reason we talked about specialization before. Okay. In order to be of real value to your client, it's you want to work on 1 or 2 things. Now, when it comes to prospecting, let's go back to prospecting. You want to find an area where you feel you could do best. A lot of times that starts with where you live, maybe where you worked previously, what a spot. And what you want to do is, if you're prospecting geographically, you want to increase the circle, if you will. Increase your prospecting area in concentric circles rather than decide you're going to be specialist here and you're going to be a specialist over here. Okay. I mean, if you live in the town of Colony and you know a lot about Colony, a lot about what's going on in the residential world in Colony, but then you have an opportunity to list something in Coxsackie, it's going to be very difficult, even if you do that deal in Coxsackie. See you with area, that's one more reason to call you when they're thinking about listing their house. Okay. Oh, I see their signs everywhere. That's not going to happen if you have 1 listing in Colony, 1 listing in Galway, 1 listing in Coxsackie, because people aren't going to see your name all over the place. Something else to think about. What should I do if I have a lead on a commercial property? If you know a commercial agent, call them. Okay. If you don't know a commercial agent, you can ask your manager for a recommendation. And if your manager doesn't have a good recommendation, is not sure, then you should call the current manager of commercial, that's Andrew Mangini, and he will refer you to the person who's best suited for that type of property in that location, so that your client ends up getting the best service. Another great thing about real estate is you can make a good chunk of money without doing anything by referring a transaction to a commercial broker. We had, what was it? Just under $13,000 went to an agent in Delmar because she knew the owner of a big apartment building in downtown Albany. Wasn't equipped to handle it, referred it to a commercial agent. Commercial agent did a transaction and she got $13,000 for the referral. Now, most referral checks aren't that big, but a referral check between $2,000 and $5,000 is very common. Okay? That's just for referring commercial situation to a commercial agent. Last question is, do you love what you do in commercial? Yes, I do. Been doing it for 30 years and don't intend to stop. Question?
I know Ray is usually good for a question or two.
What's that?
I said I know Ray is usually good for a question or 2 or 10.
Come on, Ray.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm actually going through a sub property right now, which is mixed residential and commercial. We're actually closing on it, targeted date November 12th.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, as the aspect of commercial, I mean, getting into big properties, looking into, you know, the reason why I got into real estate is because I'm looking to invest. I want to be an invest just as much. I mean, I get it. Chip loves the people. Been around people a little too long, but it's but I like the aspect of there's many things about real estate. So investing, and I'd like to eventually invest into commercial myself. Not know if I would probably sell commercial. That referral, $2 to $5 grand, not bad. I like that idea.
Yeah.
You know, but as a part of, you know, in commercial and getting into commercial, you know, investing, you know, what would you consider about that aspect?
The hottest properties right now in commercial are apartments and warehouses. Warehouses are a little tricky, but I would recommend to anybody who wants to invest to look at apartments, because you've got everything from a 2-family house. You're probably not going to do a 200-unit garden style apartment project, but let's say from a 2-unit to a 12-unit. Okay. Banks, of all the types of commercial property, banks love apartments the most. Okay. So your chances of getting it financed are much better when you look at apartments. Okay. Now, why do banks love apartments? Well, if you've got a strip mall with 4 tenants and 1 tenant leaves, you're 25% vacant. Okay. And it could take a long time to get another tenant. You've got a 12-unit and somebody moves out. I don't know what the percentage would be, but chances are you could find another tenant next month. Okay. So the risk for the banks is much less with apartments than it is with anything else. And interest rate is a reflection of risk. So you're going to get, for a commercial investment property, you're going to get your best deal on the interest in the time to pay it off with apartments. You can get a fully amortized 30-year loan on apartments. That's something you cannot get on a commercial property. On a commercial property, you could get a loan that's amortized over 20 years, but the loan is only good for 10. When you get to 10 years, you have to pay it off or renegotiate an extension. Okay.
What is it? More like a balloon loan?
Well, it's a balloon in the sense that you don't have to pay the bank off. I mean, that's not your only option. You can find another bank, okay, and pay them off with that, okay, as opposed to having to come up with the cash to pay it off no matter what. All right. Now, most banks will re-up you, but what they want to make sure of is what has happened to interest rates in the meantime. Maybe the first time around you got a loan at 6%, but interest rates have been creeping up. Now your 10 years are up and they say, we'll refinance the balance, but now the interest rate's 8.25. Okay. The thing, when you look at investment property, the interest rates at the bank have an unbelievable impact on what that property is worth. And we'll see that in a minute. when we do the economic analysis. At low interest rates, your property is worth a heck of a lot more than it is when the interest rates get higher. I mean, back in the 80s, we had interest rates of 12 to 15%. Now you can get a loan on apartments now. I think you can still do it for 5 or under. That almost triples what you can get for the property. Okay. So now, what I tell people when I'm looking for a listing, I tell people, look, if you're not in this for the long haul, Mr. and Mrs. Owner, or you're not willing to put a lot of money into this place right now, this is the absolute best time to sell it. Because interest rates are low, you'll get more money for it. Okay. Now on the buying side, although you're paying a little more than you if the interest rate's 12%, your interest rate is only going to be 5%. And now as a new owner, with a little more vim and vinegar, you're going to spruce it up. You're going to increase the rents, something they just never wanted to do. Okay. And your investment grows under your ownership. By far, Ray, it's apartments.
That's where I'll start.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
What do you think? 4 unit?
3, I would do a 3 or 4 in a heartbeat. Yeah.
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 Because I know what 6 is commercial, right? Anything 6.
Once you get above 4
or 4, right?
Commercial, you have to get a commercial loan. But the commercial loans on larger apartment buildings are still a deal.
Yeah, because
paperwork will be a little bit different, but it's still, the bank still loves them and you won't have any problem.
Commercial loan, you can still do what, 3% on those too, right?
You got to be a pretty good borrower to get 3%.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's a pension fund.
No, 3% down, I mean.
Oh, 3% down.
Yeah.
No, it depends on the bank. Depends on you may have to put down 10.
Okay.
For a larger one. But just call the bank and people don't realize you can just call banks and ask them questions. We'll get into that. When you don't know what kind of factor to use in evaluating property, I call the bank. I say, what would you like to see for a vacancy factor on a property I have listed in Scotia? Fairly old property, say it's like 40 years old. What would you want to see when you do the analysis? What are you going to use for a vacancy factor? Because if they say they're going to use 7, but you use 3 in your analysis to make your property look better, that's not right. Okay, that's not right. Well, why don't we get into that now? Because all that is part of the next discussion. What's the property worth? We're doing this. Why is the correct value important? Well,
you're muted.
how'd that happen? I was just sitting here. Okay. Ryan must have muted me. Ryan. So did you hear the first part? Why the correct value is important?
That's where it ended.
Okay. So you buy at the right price, sell at the right price, finance at the right price, all that stuff. Sometimes, I mean, I've been asked in the past to value a property for estate purposes. Okay. So it's all determining value, all different reasons. Now, there are 3 methods to do evaluation on an investment property. Gross rent multiplier, the comparable sales approach, and the income approach. Okay. The first 2 are, well, the first one especially is kind of wacko. But I had an investor who bought 10 pieces of property using the gross rent multiplier method. Convince him that there's a lot of information missing when you do that. But when I tried to show him an income statement, his eyes just glazed over. So I said, okay, we'll use gross rent. Now, the way you value a property with a gross rent multiplier is you take how much income you generate in a year and you multiply it by a number between 4 and 6. Okay? Problem number one. The difference between 4 and 6 will give you values that are 50% different. Okay? For example, I got a 4-unit building here. This was from a long time ago. Each unit rented for $500 a month. So the annual rental income for the building was $24,000. You multiply that times 4, and you get $96,000. You multiply it times 6, and you get $144,000. That's a pretty big gap, right? Plus, not only do you have a question of what multiplier to use, this method does not look at expenses at all. Do you think it makes a difference in the valuation of a property if the owner is paying for all the utilities as opposed to none of the utilities? Makes a big difference. His or her expenses are going to be much higher if they're paying for all the utilities. And that obviously lowers the net income. If it lowers the net income, the property is not worth as much. Okay. Now, what number to use? I said between 4 and 6. Buyers want to use 3 and sellers want to use 7. Okay. So it's just hardly ever works. I had one investor, as I said, who did it this way. I don't expect to ever see another one. Okay. Because there are so many pieces of information missing in the analysis. Now, on comparable sales, you talk about a 4-unit. So you've got a 4-unit that you want to value, and you find 3 other 4 units that you think are comparable, and they sold for $138,500, $121,900, and $109,000. So you average those, and you get $123,000, $133,000. So your value for the property is now that average, $123,000. Here again, not only do you have no accommodation for the expenses, you don't even have an accommodation for what the rents are. What if the rents in your property are average $750, but 2 of the comps you looked at, the rents are $850? You think that makes a difference? You betcha. Okay. And on the expense side, you have the same holes that you have the gross rent multiplier. Now, even with that being said, a while ago, I had a new agent who sold, had a 4-unit in Rensselaer under contract. And they were waiting for the appraisal. And I said, did you give them the pro forma income statement? I said, and she said, I did, but they're going to use comparable sales. I said, comparable sales on a 4-unit investment property? She said, yeah. So she was new. I figured she had missed something. So I said I said, what bank is it going through? It's going through Kinderhook Bank. I knew the lender at Kinderhook. I called him right then and there with the lady sitting in front of me. Hey, Lee, Richard Farrow, blah, blah, blah. We have a transaction that you guys do an appraisal on, yeah? The agent said that you're using comparable sales to do the appraisal. Is that true? And he said, yes. Which surprised the heck out of me. He said, yeah, he says, we're pretty familiar with the property and, you know, we figured there's no problem at this price. I said, okay, great. But I haven't seen that since. Maybe they still do it. And if they do, it has to be a situation where they're very familiar with the property that's under contract and they have a comparable sales database that they know a lot about. I mean, if that's the case, it's a lot easier to do with comparable sales and income approach. Now, if you've got somebody who really cares about the value and wants to know if they are going to make money and how much of the money are they going to make, you've got to use the income approach to value, okay? Now, with the income approach, you know the exact rents that are being collected. You know the exact expenses that are being collected, okay? Your first hurdle will be to get from the owner what his or her expenses are. They will give you the taxes, the insurance, and they'll lie about a maintenance number, and let's say that's it. Yeah, but that's not it, okay? You've got snow removal, you've got landscaping, you've got waste disposal, okay? For larger projects, you should even have a number in there for leasing commissions, okay? So there's a lot more involved. You use a vacancy factor in. People tell me there's no need to use a vacancy factor. I've never had a vacancy in 22 years. Even if that's true, the bank is still going to put one in, okay? Because that's the way to do it if you're going to be conservative. I mean, the bank's biggest fear is getting stuck with this property, okay? If the buyer defaults. So they want to know they're going to be in a good situation if the buyer defaults. And if they're the ones that are lending the money, their rules hold, right? So they're going to put a vacancy factor in. For larger projects, they're going to put in a factor to manage the property. Now, a 4-unit, no. 5 or 6 unit, maybe not. But you get to a 12-unit, it's going to take some convincing at the bank that this buyer is going to manage that property himself or herself, okay? If they have a track record of doing that, it'll work. If it's their first investment property, never going to work, okay? I sold a 40, I don't remember if it was 46 or 48 unit property. The buyer had owned other property in the past, but never a big apartment project, okay? For certain reasons, the loan was going through Chase Bank. The buyer had to give the bank a signed property management agreement from a bona fide property management company before they would close the loan. Okay. Now, as it turned out, she's managing the property and has been since the inception, but she couldn't get it closed unless she had a property management agreement in place. So the bank could put in a factor for what that was going to cost. Okay. So now, the object is to, once you estimate what the net income is going to be, then you have to have a factor that you apply to this number. It's called the capitalization rate. Capitalization rate is kind of like a rate of return on the income. So in my example, what was the income? So the net income was after rent and expenses, the net income was $14,880. If properties were selling at a 10 cap, a 10% capitalization rate, you would multiply that by 10 or divide by 0.1, and you would get a value of $148,800. Okay. But properties aren't selling at a 10 cap. They're selling at a 7.5. So what's that property worth today? Let's see, 14,880 divided by 0.075, $198,000. $50,000 more because of the capitalization rate, and the capitalization rate is always determined by the interest rates that are being charged. Okay, so that's why it's important to know what the cap rates are these days, as well as knowing all the income and expenses on the property. So if you turn to this page, this is, it has to say pro forma, okay? Because if you put income statement and the buyer doesn't earn what was on the bottom line, you, actually the company, would get sued. Because you said they would make $14,000 and they only made $9,000. Okay? Pro forma means an estimate based on certain assumptions. And you can't be held liable for the exact number if it says pro forma. So here again, I probably should update this with more up-to-date rents. I've got rents of $490, $535. But what you see on the right side is the rent for every apartment. It adds up to $5,970 a month, which is $71,640 a year. That number is the potential rental income. If all the apartments are rented at the current rents, that's your potential rental income, and it's $71,640. But as I said, you gotta have a vacancy factor. And where this property was located in its history, 7% is the number most commonly used. Okay. But if you're selling a 12 unit in a very bad part of town where shootings are occurring, the bank might want to see a vacancy factor of 15. So if you're not quite sure, call the bank and ask. If it's a brand new 4 unit in Delmar, they may say you could use a 3 or a 4, which is going to increase the value of the property. Okay. So once you subtract vacancy, you get what's called effective rental income. Now, you have to add in any other income on the property, like laundry machines or renting out garages. So I added that income, $2,300 from the washing machine and dryers, and $1,800 for renting out some garages. Excuse me. Now your gross operating income is $70,725. Okay. Now you subtract all the expenses. Remember I told you they'll tell you taxes, maintenance, and insurance? Look at that list. There's a lot more there than taxes, maintenance, and insurance. Taxes, water and sewer, and a lot of people forget. Property insurance, maintenance. If they really have good records and they can show you that they spent $2,800 on maintenance, fine. The bank is going to automatically put a minimum number on maintenance of $300 to $350 per unit. So on a 12 unit, they would put $3,600. So in their analysis, they might change the 28 to 36. Now, if the owner says that they really only paid $200 for maintenance last year, that could be true, but the place is probably going to start to fall apart. You've got to maintain these properties, okay? If it's a slumlord who's just collecting the rent, making as much as he or she can, and don't care what's going to happen to the property in the future, that's not going to work anyway, all right? So what else do we have? The dumpster, trash removal, lawn and snow, utilities. Now this utilities is a pretty small amount. That's most likely for the lights in the hallway and the lights in the basement. Okay? Not the utilities in the apartments. The apartments have their own heat and electric. Okay? Here's a management fee of 7% because it's a 12 unit. Look, that's an expense of $5,000 coming out of the net income. But if you're going to do this right, that's what you got to do. Now, every other agent out there is going to leave that off. Their income is going to be higher, and try and convince a buyer that's the right number. It's very difficult for us. Let me tell you, we have an argument every time we try and tell somebody what their property's worth, because we include everything that should be included. You know, I tell them it's worth 575,000. Oh, I had another broker tell me it was worth 675. Can I see their analysis? Yeah, it's got like 4 things on it. But if you're going to prove your value, it's better to disappoint them now than disappoint them in the future. Okay. So once we subtract the operating expenses of 33,000, we get a net operating income of 37,056. Now here again, in order to do value, you divide the net income by the decimal of the cap rate. So the decimal of a 10% cap rate is 0.10. Multiply it times the decimal. No, divide. I was right the first time. So if you divide 37,000 by 0.10, you're going to get 562. But let's say this is not a great place and the cap rate for this property is more likely to be 8.5 instead of 10. So what would it be worth at an 8.5? Let's see. 37,056. Enter 0.085 divide. 435,000. $75,000 more. Okay. So people ask me all the time, you know, what kind of cap rates are properties selling for? It depends on the property and depends most on the risk involved with the person or persons occupying that property. How good a risk is that tenant? Now, if you look at a brand new Walgreens as something you want to invest in, the cap rate is going to be between 3.75 and 4%. The lower the cap rate, the higher the price to buy it. Okay? So buyers are willing to pay for a Walgreens at that low a number, that low a cap rate, that high a price, because the risk of Walgreens going bad is very, very small. Okay? In fact, you could look today at the difference between the cap rates for a Walgreens and CVS. Walgreens would be 3.75 to 4. CVS is going to be 4.4 to 4.5. Okay. A strip mall with all mom and pop tenants, you got a hair salon, a liquor store, that kind of thing, is going to have a much higher cap rate. That might be an 8 or a 9 because retail is in so much trouble these days. Okay. The retail operation, all retail operations. And the bank is going to view that as a lot more risky than an apartment building, as I said before. Okay. So cap rates are a result of what the risk is. The lower the risk, the higher the price. Just like you've got a $10,000 to invest. You put it in the stock market, higher risk than it would be if you bought treasuries. But the return on a treasury is peanuts because the risk is so small, right? Risk reward. That's what you're always looking at. Now, the next page, I show you, and I will show a buyer this, but I would only do it at the listing price. Okay. So if you bought this property for $425,000, you got to come up with a down payment of 25%. That's $106,000. Closing costs are estimated at 4%. That's another $17,000. So your total cash outlay is going to be $123,250. with a 25% down payment, you've got to get a mortgage for $318,000. And let's say you can get it at 6% for 20-year amortization. Your monthly payment is going to be $284,000. Your annual debt's going to be $27,000. Your projected income, you'll remember from the previous page, was $37,056. Now you subtract what you're going to have to pay for debt, $27,000, and you get $9,653. Cash flow after debt. All right. Don't try and memorize this. Just think about it. It makes sense. How much money do you have to put in your pocket after you've paid all the expenses and you've paid your mortgage payment? $9,600. Now, what did this investment cost you to get into? From up above, it cost you $123,000. So you invested $123,000 and you got $9,600 for the first year. If you divide that out, you get 7.8%. So you got a 7.8% return on your investment. If all these income and expense assumptions took place. Now, if you had no vacancy, your return was higher. If you had to spend a lot of money on maintenance, your return is probably a little bit lower. Okay. But this is what you're starting at, 7.8. Now, this is, if I was going to list this property for $425,000, I would only show the buyer the first column. Because I can't insinuate that, well, maybe you can pick it up for $375,000. Because that's not fiduciary responsibility to my seller. By automatically telling a buyer, you could get it for less. You never say that. You can never say that. Okay. So if I'm now representing a buyer, I say, well, let's see what the cash on cash, does that make sense? Cash on cash. It's the cash I got for the cash I invested. That's where that term comes from, cash on cash. So now I'm representing a buyer on this property. It's not my listing. And I say, let's see what the cash on cash return would be if we could pick this puppy up for $375,000. Then I go through all the numbers again. Oh, look, 11.8% return. That's pretty good. With all the other benefits of owning real estate, an 11% cash on cash return is pretty good. It's damn good. Okay. Now, let me tell you about one last important factor that banks look at. Write down DCR. And under DCR, write debt coverage ratio. I will show you how to calculate this, but this is a measure of the cushion that the lender is going to be giving to the buyer, or that the buyer is going to have. The bank does not want to lend you just enough money so the net income is zero, right? That's too risky for the bank. So the bank will calculate the DCR, the debt coverage ratio. The debt coverage ratio is projected net income, $37,056, divided by, in the first column, the debt, $27,403. And if you divide that out, 37,056, enter, 27,403 divide. That comes out to 1.35. That means the buyer has a 35% cushion in his debt. The bank would love this mortgage. Okay? Their absolute minimum, in every case I've seen recently, is 1.2. A 20% cushion. Remember when the banks all got in trouble and the real estate world fell apart? Banks were lending money at a debt coverage ratio of 1, meaning there was no cushion. Vacancy went up, maintenance went up. The buyer all of a sudden doesn't have money to pay their mortgage. They got to get foreclosed on. Okay. But the bank started that by lending money at such a risky position. Okay. But that measurement is debt coverage ratio, 1.35 in this case. Obviously, it would be a hell of a lot higher at 375. The bank would love this loan at 135. Just so you know. Questions? No? Ray, as an investor, you'll look at a listing. The broker will give you numbers that don't have anywhere near this detail. So you apply this detail and then do the capitalization rate and tell them what the property is really worth. And
Yeah,
why?
that's phenomenal.
You can show them why.
I was sitting here writing everything what you were saying down. I was like, oh man, I got to get all this stuff. It's gold.
I showed.
Hopefully this will be recorded so you guys can all watch it again. It's I know I'm going to watch it at least 30 times over. Richard never ceases to amaze us.
When you've been in the business 30 years, you encountered everything. So I showed a seller with what he wanted for his property. The buyer would lose $10,000 a year. And I said, why would somebody buy your property and lose $10,000 a year? It doesn't make sense. And his answer was, well, you got to find somebody who's got cash and they don't have to get a mortgage. I said, if they've got $375,000 in cash, they're going to buy $1 million property. Okay? The reason you buy real estate is leverage and other people's money, the banks, right? You can own $1 million property for $300,000 out of your pocket. Okay? You can't do that with diamonds. You can't do that with art, right? That's one of the advantages of real estate. I said, and if they have the $375,000, it's sitting somewhere now generating an income. Why would they pull it out of that place to buy your property and not only not get that income, lose money? This is when you start to want to just grab somebody by the lapels and just go. I go. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But when you got this kind of detail to back it up, it should work. But let me talk 3 minutes about being faced with a situation on a listing you would love to have, but the seller wants too much money for it. I got called to on a listing appointment for a medical building in Clifton Park. I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, it was a frame building. It was about 6,000 square feet. I couldn't believe my luck in that within the last 2 years, 3 other medical buildings had sold in Clifton Park. I never have information that good. But I figured this analysis is going to be right on. There's no way they can argue with this. I told them their property was worth, I think it was like $575,000. And there were, the building was only like 4 or 5 doctors. One doctor was on a conference call. The other ones were in the room. I gave the analysis. Nobody looked very happy. The guy on the phone says, well, obviously this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about since we have a $600,000 loan on the place. And the listing went to Don Nichter of Caldwell Banker at, what do you list it for? $775? I lost the listing. About 6 months later, the property sold. Guess what it sold for? My price. So I looked at that and I said, aha, I was right. But then I thought, but I'm not getting the commission check. Don is. How do I prevent this from happening in the future? Okay. You can't always prevent it, but there are ways around it. You show them your analysis of what it's, and by the way, you never want to say, I think it's worth. Okay. Because if you're tied to that price, you'll immediately get rejected because of you. That was your price. If you say instead, based on current market conditions, a selling price would most likely be, okay? It's not you, it's the market. The market determines the price, not you. You're assembling the data about the market, okay? So you say, they want $675, you think it's worth $575. The current market conditions would imply that a value is closer to $575. Nope, $675. Okay, tell you what. Because we are surprised every once in a while. We'll list it at your price, but you have to agree to a market review or market reaction every 30 days. And possibly a price adjustment. Are you willing to do that? Most people will say yes, you'll get the listing, okay? And every time a comp comes up that supports the value you thought it should be, you send it to them, okay? And then you have your conversation every 30 days. That way, at least you have a shot, okay? Now,
You muted yourself again.
Ryan, why do you keep muting me?
I will never mute you, my friend. I will keep you unmuted for the rest of my life.
I'm trying something out that you can show.
I know, seriously, Rich, I could pick your brain for days, man.
I don't know if I have enough up there to make it worthwhile, Ray, but here's something else you can show a seller. This pyramid, can you see it? Okay. M along the bottom is the breadth of the market, which means the number of people that would be interested in your property. The P is price, okay? Obviously, the higher the price, the fewer people are going to be interested in your property. Does that make sense, Mr. and Mrs. Seller? Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so the market seems to indicate the values here. You want this. Time can make a difference. So if you're willing to give me a 2-year listing, we can definitely start out at your price. Okay? We could do that. Or you have to accept that there's going to be fewer people. Now, what I like about this diagram is the point on top. That's a crazy price. But there may be somebody out there. Now, this happens in commercial a lot, okay? This is when the buyer absolutely, positively has to have your property. And it'll always be for a strategic reason, not because it's the best value out there, okay? For instance, there was a guy who had a beauty salon on the corner of 146 and 146A. I thought the property was worth about $350,000. Oh, no. It's worth $1 million for sure. It's okay. I'm sorry, I can't help you there. These are the cases I'd like to say, you don't need a real estate agent, you need a magician. But I didn't. I just said, I'm sorry, that's not something I can help you. So time goes by. The property sells for $1 million. It wasn't that big a property. Why? We were stewards. Cumberland Farms had just built a beautiful convenience gas store on the other corner of the intersection. Stewart's is spending $30 million a year right now, revamping or expanding old stores, putting in new stores. That store was a piece of crap, didn't have gas. They were going to get killed by Cumberland Farms. So they pay $1 million for this property. Now they have a big brand new store and they have gas. It was worth it to them. I remember not too long ago when the highest price stewards would pay for a location, no matter what, was $450,000. Now they're paying up to $1 million just to add on the property they already own. So that's what can happen up here. So I tell people, we can wait for this person to come along. But if your neighbors are, Joe Schmo, who could care less, property is always worth most to the neighbor. And it's always for a strategic reason, okay? But somebody may come to the market absolutely positively, has to be on your spot. Sure, might happen. But now I want a 5-year listing. Okay? So that's just some general real estate stuff. Questions?
No, that was great. That was an awesome diagram. I like that diagram.
It works. It really works. And you shouldn't have it pre-done in plastic. You should draw it right then and there for them when you're having the presentation. It has more of an effect, I've found. Looks more hokey when you cut out of a binder. Say, here, let me show you this.
Yeah, like it was designed to set you up.
Yeah. Anything else? Before we get to my rules for negotiation? First of all, I didn't invent these. I just put the list together because I think they're important. Okay. Number one, I told you before, nobody charges more for commission than we do. Okay. So you constantly have to prove your value. A good part of your commission check is payment for your negotiating skill. Don't be a carrier pigeon. Now, by that, I mean, you have an offer, you carry it to the seller and say, what do you want to do? Okay, you carry it back to the other broker. That's crap, okay? Offer comes in, is this a good offer? Is it a bad offer? What do we know about the buyer? Do we think there's room? Why do we think there's room? Has the property been on the market a long enough time to really test the market? Okay, that's the discussion you have with the seller before you carry back the counter to the other broker, all right? What's going on in the market right now? Here's a perfect example. It just happened today. I've had a property listed up in Warrensburg for 2 years. We just got an offer that seems a little bit low. But guess what? Warrensburg is talking about a 1-year moratorium on building anything. So the buyer is going to have to carry this property for at least a year and not even be able to do what they want to do. That'll be factored into my discussion with the sellers. Okay. Number 2, never accept the first offer. Why do I say that?
Because you're killing your chances for potential. And you don't want to look desperate.
Well, what if the property's been on the market for 4 years? You've had no offers, and a pretty decent offer comes in. I still say, never accept the first offer. First offer from a person, not the first offer being on the market. The first offer from a buyer. Never accept the first offer. Kelly? Why?
I have no clue.
All right, then I'll tell you. Everyone's biggest fear is leaving money on the table. Okay? Offer comes in, yeah, we'll take it. That buyer is automatically going to think, oh crap, I probably could have got it cheaper. They really jumped at this. So what's that buyer going to do? That buyer is going to go through that structural report with a fine-tooth comb and find anything and everything he or she can use to lower the price on that property. Okay? Because they feared they left money on the table. even if the offer is good money-wise, counter something. Okay, we'll accept this offer if you agree to close in 30 days max. And if you don't, it'll cost you $5,000. Okay, we'll accept this offer, but you can't take 60 days to do the inspections. You can only have 30. Counter something. That way they feel like, okay, they earned it. Okay. Even if the money is good, don't accept the first offer. Counter something. All right. 3, agency works because there's an unemotional member of the team. That's you. Now, if you get emotionally involved in representing your client, you're actually harming them. You want to think that you're helping them because you're taking this so personally. But you taking it personally is going to lead to something, could lead to something that's going to hurt the transaction rather than make it better. You have to represent your clients with the best of your ability, representing just their interests, but it's got to be unemotional. Okay. I had a transaction once on a mobile home park, and the negotiations were not going well after the initial offer. And despite all good reason, I got the buyer and seller together. I thought maybe we could put it together if they're both in the same room. The seller ended up taking a swing at the buyer at the height of a very bad discussion. And the deal fell through for obvious reasons. I had been too emotionally involved in the transaction. And I won't say that I caused it, but I didn't help the situation. During the conversation, I was getting out of hand. Okay. So try and be unemotional. Think of an attorney. Okay. An attorney who can be representing a client going nuts in the courtroom, but as soon as he or she walks out of the courtroom, nothing. Okay? You can't be emotional in it. All right. Number 4, sometimes you have to negotiate with your clients to save them from themselves. This is going to happen a lot, okay? Your client is going to want to do something stupid that you know is stupid, but they want to do it anyway, all right? So there's a negotiation there between you and your client. Get ready for it. It's going to happen. 5, always get it in writing. If they won't take the time, they're not serious. And the reason for that is, well, just ask them if they'll accept $350. Okay, yeah, they'll accept $350. And then when you get the written offer, it's $315. Because the buyer thought that he jumped at the $350 too fast. Then you get to, well, you know, I thought about it and financing, and I'm going to have to do something with the roof. If we had that $350 in writing and we signed it, we'd have a deal of $350. Get it in writing. If they won't take the time, they're not serious. It doesn't take that long to write up an offer. Although I got to tell you, it takes a lot longer to write an offer in residential than it does in commercial. You guys got like 75 forms you got to fill out because of the Department of State. You know that virtually none of those forms are required for commercial. We don't have to do an agency disclosure. It's not required by law. It's amazing. I can do $1 million. I just did a $3 million sale transaction, 4 pieces of paper. That's it. Amazing. But that can't be the reason you're getting a commercial, right, Ryan? Okay, 6. If the situation, oh, here you go. The situation is tense. Getting the buyer and seller together may make things worse. I just talked about that, and it did. 7, it's not just the what. Even more important is the why, okay? Somebody will give you a what. I won't do it because, okay? Or I won't do this. You've got to know why they feel that way. And the reason for that is you want to know if there's another way to get them what they're looking for. Or maybe their why is not something, say, that's really going to happen. Okay? So once you get the what, keep probing. I understand what you're telling me. That's all. Okay? And that goes for your own client. That goes for the other side. Talk less, listen more. I love this. You learn nothing when you're talking. All right? In the midst of a negotiation, you want to know as much possible about both sides in order to have a better chance to put a deal together. Right? Now look at number 9. Silence itself is a powerful tool. Were you a little uncomfortable when I was just sitting here not saying a word?
I'll tell you what, when I didn't hear the beginning part of that, and also I looked up at my screen, I'm like, why is nobody talking? It was the most frustrating, tense thing. So I unmuted myself just to say something, and I think that proved your point.
Exactly. Silence itself. I mean, you've heard he who speaks last loses. Okay, it's something like this. It's an unbelievable tool. When you get to a point, I mean, there's no reason you have to say something, just sit there. It'll seem like 2 hours, and it's most likely going to be 30 to 45 seconds because people get so uncomfortable. But have the fortitude to try it. It's amazing. Number 10, in the end, win-win negotiations are the most successful. Nobody wants to be taken advantage of. Nobody wants to be had. Even if the transaction closes, you still are going to have somebody that's ticked off and may try to find a way to get even. At the very least, your reputation is not going to be as good as it could be. Okay. From the people I've worked with in this business, the ones who have the best reputation are the ones that negotiated a good deal for both sides. One in particular that used to work for our firm loved the fact that he beat the hell out of the other side. And he was not thought well of in the community. He didn't get hired because he was such a great negotiator in a lot of situations. He was working with me on a deal that attitude almost cost me that deal. It was about $475,000. And it's not a good thing. Win-win is the best, no matter what. Okay, what else you want to know? Anything about real estate? If I don't know, I'll make up the answer. Ryan, you have any closing comments?
I think that this was the first time I listened to this via Zoom, aside from when I did new agent training a long, long time ago. And I have notes written down, so I can't thank you enough for my own personal growth. This was amazing. I can only imagine how much it's going to benefit Chip and the rest of the crew right over here, Chip, Kelly, and Ray. It will be on replay, and I'm just excited to do another one.
And if anybody wants a little more information, wants to talk a little bit more about something we discussed, Ryan can give you my contact information. My email address is obviously rferro@BHHS, etc. Give me a call. I mean, as you can probably tell, I love doing this, and I'd be happy to help out.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Richard. We all appreciate it. And I will have everybody. I'm sure your phone's going to blow up. I know Ray is going to call you right now. He might even send you a handwritten note and holiday cards just to pick your brain a little bit more. So
now, Ray, I may not be able to return that call right away because I got 6 while we were doing it.
We'll close some more deals, and I'll have the recording up by this evening. Thanks, everybody. And Thursday, just so everybody knows, Thursday is our last class. We're going to do a quick panel discussion with some other realtors. Have questions prepared that you want to ask your peers. And it's just going to be the morning class, and then we're done. All right. Talk to
One last thing. I normally say good luck. I stopped saying good luck because if you do what you're supposed to do, which isn't brain surgery, but if you do what you're supposed to do, you don't need luck. Okay?
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Richard.
Take care.